live from the internet. It's ZN Live,
Live.
right? Episode 293. Do you believe that, Lyra? Today, we are very happy to have an expert guest on the show, Dorian, who is both an expert at political communication, but he's also an entrepreneur. He founded a travel business online, and he's running a circle that discusses digital communication issues around the tech sector. So Dorian, to begin with, I know that you have this really interesting travel business. So tell us a little bit about what it is that you do, and how has this summer, this post-COVID summer been, and what do you think is going to happen next?
Hi, Liora. Hi, Phil. Thanks for having me on the show today. Great to be here. Well, no, indeed, definitely. Like you say, I've got a bit of a varied profile. I've always liked to have different aspects to my work life, and every day is different, which is something I enjoy a lot. Regarding the travel sector, yeah, of course. So it's been a challenging few years for my startup. It's called Sphere Travel Club, essentially a platform for holiday home rentals and exchanges in between owners. The challenge, of course, being COVID, with the travel restrictions having been up and down, left and right, changing. Just now, Japan only slowly opening up, so it's still definitely around. I would say the positive note for the travel sector is that it starts to become manageable. We know that now towards the autumn and winter, we'll get some higher numbers and maybe some small waves. Hopefully they will stay small. But we know that for next summer, it will lower again, and thereby we will know how to plan about this. Of course, hygiene rules and safety rules we have to stick to those, and those stay in place. But generally speaking, the mood is high. There's been a lot of rebound travel this summer from all colleagues, other companies I've heard of. They had very good numbers as well as ours, of course. And so it's certainly a sector that is back on the boom, or certainly on the up.
Do you think people forgot COVID? Because, I mean, I was traveling, and I think you barely see any restrictions in place anymore. I mean, do you think there's any residual change from COVID?
I think that the most change, or the residual elements from COVID, is to enjoy life and enjoy traveling again. But I was thinking about this the other day. I was in Japan a few years ago, and there they still wear masks on public transports pretty much all the time. Of course, they're very hygienic and respectful, generally speaking. And actually, the flu infection rate in Japan is much lower each year, because everybody wears masks in public transport. So I was, in a way, hoping that maybe this would stick also here in Europe, generally speaking, maybe on planes, in public transport. But I don't think it will. It's too much of a discomfort, and I guess we are too much used to the pleasures of life and the comfort of life, and too much of an individualistic society compared to Japan, for instance. Hence, I don't think those things will stick, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's harder to stick to those new behaviors in Europe. I think, in planes they still say you're advised to wear a mask, and I think most people don't feel that they should, and it's just too much trouble.
It depends on how you communicate around it. I mean, I was on the train recently from Germany to Belgium, and as we crossed the border into Belgium, the train conductor said, look, we've now left Germany. The obligation to wear a mask is not valid anymore, so feel free to do whatever you want as of now, but we still recommend to wear the mask. Great. I mean, there is a power of communication, and of course, you can frame things differently. It all depends on the intention and where you want to go, of course.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, if you go to a hospital, you still have to wear a mask. If you're getting a vaccine, and Lyra and I just got the vaccine yesterday, so there you have to wear a mask. So, Lyra, how was your 4th vaccine shot?
Yeah, we do these things together, Phil and I, in
Absolutely.
tandem. It was great. It was me and a bunch of 70-year-olds getting their vaccine. So I felt very wise, because, that's what you do. And now my whole body aches, like I went to do heavy sports. And I feel like that means that it works. So I'm also a big fan of the influenza vaccine. So I like to do these things which are easy and then protect you. So yeah, I'm all good.
Yeah. No, actually, I was surprised. There was a big queue of people, actually, and it was packed. So, because I expected it to be pretty empty, or at least much less than in the previous waves, but there were quite a few people. So let's see what
What age group?
happens. Sorry?
What age?
It was probably the older age group, but still, I mean, just to get to the parking was completely full. People were directing people, things like that. So it was actually, compared to the times I did the previous vaccine, I was surprised, because I expected it to be a fairly, not getting a lot of traction from people. Yesterday, I was actually talking to IFA, which is the International Federation of Aging, on vaccination communication to the older adult population. And I think, this is really one of the challenges, which is how do you communicate and inform in a way that this population is comfortable with the information and the content that they have. Now, Dorian, one other thing that you're, one of the many things you're active on is, the conversations around tech topics, digital topics. So you say you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing there, and maybe, misinformation was, I would say, the big topic of the COVID pandemic. How do platforms deal with this? What is their responsibility, and especially in relation to vaccine communication? So what trends are you seeing in those discussions, and what would you say are the big challenges facing the tech space?
Well, my angle from tech is essentially one of the small businesses. I created the Digital Circle, which is a round table for small business representatives in the Brussels bubble, to essentially get together and share information, knowledge, intel. Why? Because the initial challenge was that if you are a one woman or one man show around Brussels, there's just so much to cover in the digital domain, because digital touches everything and yet is in all domains. So impossible to really cover it all as one person. So the idea was to really get together with people from different sectors, sit down around the same table, leave our roles behind or at the door for a moment, and then just chat, discuss, and help each other out with information. So it works quite well. We have people from the institutions represented, people from different sectors, mainly and only, no, actually only Europeans. So that's, I would say, one of the challenges there. How can the European Union, in a certain way, create this, or how does it address the rift between transatlantic relationships in this domain? Is it a European versus the rest of the world battle about hegemony in the digital universe, or not? Is it working together? I mean, we see on AI standards, what is the AI European way versus the Chinese way versus the American way? I think the important thing here is to, on the one hand, know that we need global players to essentially resist and continue combating or fighting or working together with others on the global level, but at the same time also encouraging small companies to innovate and not be bought up by giga companies such as the big five, the GAFAM, and thereby essentially monopolizing the markets and blocking innovation. But then again, we see things like GDPR, which for startups were absolutely disastrous, spending lots of money and time on things that represent no real added value. But then again, there is added value because it's about privacy. And we know that our privacy and our data is kept safe, but that doesn't really push sales, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I think GDPR is a very interesting example of a very good intention and a very necessary conversation, but then the execution, especially for a lot of companies, just didn't really make sense. So people are struggling with how to implement it, how to make sense. But you sense at some level it makes sense, but it's really hard to do. Now, in the tech space, and I talked a bit about misinformation. We have a lot of potential crisis unfolding. And I know, Lior, you had a question on crisis and transparency for Dorian.
Yeah, I was wondering what your opinion is. If there is a crisis that concerns your small business, your big business, your association, your company, and it plays out on social media, people are saying things that are either not true, half true, and you see that it's not turning into a big deal, but it's just not factual. You see that the initial response that a lot of companies and organizations have is just to say, okay, let me just sit still, let me not raise any attention, then it's just gonna go away. And often it does. What is your opinion? Is that a good strategy, or do you think something else should happen?
Well, I mean, I have several points on this. First of all, my upbringing was always that liars have short legs and lies never run very far. I'm not necessarily talking about lies, but the opposite being you should always go for the truth or transparency. That's one thing. And certainly, I mean, actually, from experience, I was working for a big Belgium telecoms company that you probably know of, and we were introducing a new way of working internally, and there were some frictions with essentially the people, members of trade unions, and those that were not. And so there was a lot of online debate coming up, and that's leading to my second point about online never forgets. So it's always out there, it will always be out there. Someone will have screenshotted it, so it can always come out. So it's very important to be very diplomatic and transparent about it. And the way we managed to essentially resolve the issues back then in that company was to have a very open discourse and dialogue, essentially address, honor the fact that somebody speaks up and says, look, there's something wrong here, and then frame the debate to some extent, say, look, indeed, your point comes from there. In the bigger debate, in the context, it means this, and then address those points as good as possible to either find a compromise or calm the tempers.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I would say, Liara, to the point, what do you do in a crisis? And of course, each crisis it has a specific makeup, but I think generally, the more you can lean towards transparency, the better you're going to do in the long term. Because by avoiding the discussion, you might do okay in the short term because people didn't pick it up, but then you never know when the issue is going to come back. And I think for our business, for ZN, because we're focused on digital, I think transparency has always made more sense than the old style traditional lobbying, which is all about keeping information, not sharing it, and not communicating unless you have to. And I think what we're trying to do is to reverse that mindset and say, look, what you really want to do is be as open as you possibly can about your problems, about your issues, and show that you're doing things. Why? Because first of all, internally, it's going to make your culture much healthier. Secondly, most crises come from the inside. So even if you hide the information, when somebody leaves or is angry or whatever, they will share it with the internet. So you can't really keep things hidden in the digital age. So I think you need to lean towards transparency. I think it's often more painful in the short term, but in the long term, I think it allows you to build a better conversation. And talking about conversations, Dorian, I was at a meeting at Erasmus at the Commission just this week, Erasmus Plus. It was actually their kind of big gathering for the communicators all around Europe. First time in 3 years. So obviously, a lot of people, 30 minutes queuing at security. And it was, part of the discussion was like, oh my God, it's the first time we're all getting together. And there's a very strange thing going on, I feel. So people are kind of excited about getting together, but they also realize the cost in terms of time, travel, money of bringing a lot of people in the same room. Now they're getting massive travel restrictions because of energy prices, because of travel, because of environmental concerns. What do you think is going to happen to Brussels? How far are we going to get back to the old meetings and events and all that when we know we're going into a recession where costs are going to be cut, and we've had this whole COVID learning experience where we know we can do things online? So where do you think? I think a lot of people I can hear people saying they desperately want to go back to the old ways, especially from managers. That's what I'm reading. But in practice, I don't think it's that obvious. Where do you think things are heading?
Look, I think we're heading towards an optimization point. This whole COVID has opened a lot of new doors. So I think the Brussels bubble has been extended in the sense that we now not only have access to, I would say, Brussels-based or European-based, or we can access experts and people from around the globe. I don't know if you're familiar with Lunch Club, which is a great app website I've been using since COVID, where I every week meet new people from all over the place. From all kinds of sectors, and it's just networking whilst you're stuck at home, essentially. And so I think there is an element of this, of bringing in people from all over the place to consult, to have a broader public input. But at the same time, we all know that going for drinks, being at a networking event, talking to people, seeing people again after 2-3 years of not seeing them is amazing. You have this, and I certainly think this, I'm more old-fashioned in that way. The human interaction, the human touch is, of course, something that you can't replace in the digital world. So I think we're going towards this optimization, make it matter when you are there, have a few but good and big and nice events and come to Brussels for when it matters, but then keep in touch via the virtual side and the digital side, because it's possible. Who knows what the metaverse will come up here and what it will allow us to do as well, to have some hybrid solutions. But I think hybrid is here to stay.
My family's meeting in VR, and it's fantastic. They're in different continents and playing games together, but seeing each other like in their whole bodies. It's quite an exciting concept, which is I don't know, maybe even better than a drink. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, I think, I mean, what one point that was raised in the Erasmus Plus discussion was that the COVID has actually allowed them to go much deeper into their regional relationships. And they realized that most of their events, they excluded a whole group of people who didn't have the time to travel. It's not inclusive because for some people who have mobility issues, they can't come, financial issues. So actually, the reality is that by using the digital tools as a permanent feature, not just as a kind of a backup solution, I think the EU can start connecting much better with countries at regional, local level, which has been, I think, the big problem of Brussels, that you end up, having a bubble of people that are basically, earning more, more educated and very inward looking. And if you want to really have conversations, you need to start talking to people, and not just the people who have the time to come to Brussels and want to come to Brussels. So I suspect that this is going to be a permanent shift, and it's a political one, not just a practical one. And I also think that, although it's great to connect face-to-face and to drink alcohol together, which a lot of these meetings are about, I think that, for important political topics, you just need to be much more open than that. And it's not about how well people click. It's actually about how deep you go in talking to people that you don't normally interact with. Leo, are you going to make a point?
No, I agree.
Oh, okay. So I just want to, I think now it's time for our recommendations. Fantastic. So, Dorian, what are your recommendations for our viewers this week?
Well, so one podcast I've been following since quite a while, actually, is The History of English, which is very interesting because, I'm quite into languages. I'm now learning my 10th language, and it's very interesting to get, the etymological perspective. And in that
wait,
case,
wait, hold on. Which 10 languages? Tell us everything.
Yeah, I can't just say that like that.
So German is my mother tongue. Then French, Dutch, as a good Belgian, I speak the three. English, of course, Spanish and Italian. Then I've got some basics in Portuguese. I'm learning Japanese since a while now, and have some notions in Russian. And now I'm also learning or getting slowly into Greek, but very slowly. So
wow, that's pretty cool. And so the English podcast is for you to perfect your English.
And when you're learning these languages, do you use Duolingo, or how do you go about learning these languages?
Well, so far I learned them often through classes or in school, and now with Greek, for instance, I'm trying a new technique, really going along listening to music to be able to separate the words, to allow the brain to essentially know when to separate words. And then I bought this frequency dictionary, which is essentially the 2,500 most used words in Greek. So essentially getting the vocabulary. And I think a human generally uses, 500 words a day, pretty much. And with 500 words, you can get along life pretty easily. And so the idea, or my idea, is now I'm at 150, so I'm starting to be able to understand Greek conversations more or less, what they're saying and so on. And then the grammar will follow later on.
Sorry, sir, one more question on this. And do you think that the fact that you already were trilingual growing up helps you to acquire other languages more easily? And are you just doing this so that you can tick another language on your list, or do you have a reason for Greek specifically?
Now, I think that certainly the knowledge of other languages helps, but at the end of the day, I think it's memory. It's memory exercises. And of course, if you already know the word for dog or cat in 6-7 languages, then knowing another one isn't that difficult, because you can make 7 connections to it, which is also good for brain injuries or Alzheimer's or stuff like that, by the way. Reasons for learning a language, definitely. I go with melody. I tried learning Chinese, and sorry to all Chinese speakers, I don't think it's a beautiful language melody-wise, so that's why I opted for Japanese, which I like. If I don't like the melody of something, I just can't do it. And Greek, well, I've always had an interest in the Greek culture and the Greek language, and because so many words and the languages we use elsewhere come from Greek, so that's essentially the main motivation.
Okay, back to your book, podcast.
Yeah, no, and so history of English, great, very interesting, because it explains also how English developed, coming from German, going through Dutch, then reaching the United Kingdom, and how it developed. So very interesting take on how the language works.
I wanted to share a video, YouTube talk on how to learn any language in 6 months, which I was watching a few days ago, which I think might touch on some of the principles you talked about. So maybe have a look at it and let us know if you think that's an interesting topic. I'm doing my German Duolingo, which is a slow process, and I'm going to give another shot at Hindi next week when I'm over in India to try and improve my but I think I have some way to go to get to the 10. And you have another book on corporate communication?
Yes, indeed. So it's a book. It's a very fat book here. It's a present-day corporate communication. Not the best name, but it's essentially a book where I contributed to a few chapters as well. See it as an encyclopedia. If you're entering a job in corporate communications, have this as a Bible, so that before reaching out to a consultancy, you know or already have an idea what you could ask for or what may be needed, and then it can save you in small, easy situations. You need to organize a press conference. You have the step-by-step guide there, and then you know what the experts will be talking about.
Okay.
And obviously, so it's biased, but it's a great book.
You have a business book as well?
Yes, that's a book from good to great that I read during my studies, and I think it's very interesting. Why? Because it's all about finding the right people before going somewhere. It doesn't matter whether the idea is the best. You need to get the best people to be able to execute it properly, so really putting the focus on humans. Yeah,
there's a great metaphor of the flywheel, which I also I like, and we've been using it in the book, which is about how different parts of your business can help feed on other parts and help kind of create some kind of momentum. And on that, actually, I have a business book called High Output Management by Andy Grove, who is basically the chairman or the founder of Intel, the CEO of Intel, and who has some really simple, brilliant ideas on management, and it really goes back to very simple ideas. My favorite metaphor is the breakfast metaphor. And when you plan a project, you have to identify your boiled egg, which is the thing that takes time, and that basically you need to plan the other things around. I use that metaphor all the time. Lyra, what is your recommendation for this week?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the fact that many people want to read, but don't get around to reading however much they feel like they should, and then end up watching Netflix, for example. So I wanted to recommend a writer of short stories, Edgar Carrot. He is brilliant. The New York Times calls him, they said about him, if Kafka were Israeli and wrote about talking goldfish, then you'd end up with Edgar Carrot, which I thought was funny. He's really the Israeli Kafka. So a bit absurd, but like really funny stories. My favorite story is the bus driver who wanted to God, who basically, the book starts with him saying, yeah, I really wanted to be God, but that position was already taken. So I became bus driver, and he's very strict. If someone's late, he doesn't let him into his bus. And it's just extremely funny stories. And I think if you are struggling to read, just start with one story a day. And if you start with these stories, you just finish the whole book in no time, because they're just that good. So Edgar Carrot. There are a lot of translations to English now available, and just get your hands on all of them on your Kindle or however you prefer to read.
Yeah, and you might also want to join the book club that Criticos, one of my former students from Odisseo, has set up, getting people together in different venues to discuss different books. It's actually really successful. I just also want to point out to the comments we had from Daniel. Thank you for saying Happy Friday. Gaia, Quasi, and Gaia also saying fantastico, Dorian. I think she's going to try out your Italian, and Quasi saying 10 language. That's nice indeed. It's pretty impressive. So I believe that's all we have time for. It's been very interesting, Dorian. Thank you very much for sharing, and we look forward to seeing you online and who knows, in person. So have a great Friday. Have a great weekend. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Great to see you. Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.